Part 13. Tech Noir, 10:14 p.m. Sarah dialed the police emergency line, expecting a reassuring fatherly voice full of action and concern that would immediately dispatch 100 racing squad cars to her rescue, or, at the very least, would listen to her story, take charge of the situation, and tell her exactly what to do. What she got instead was a recording. "You have reached the Los Angeles Police Department emergency number. All of our lines are busy. If you need a police car sent out to you, please hold, and the next available..." Sarah held. She didn't know what else to do. Keeping the phone pressed to her ear, she nervously peered around the corner into the crowded room. At least there were a lot of people here, she thought. If someone tried to grab her, one of the 50 guys out there would do something, wouldn't they? Right, sure they would. Sarah craned her neck. So far there was no sign of the man in the raincoat. His eyes were so spooky. Oh please, she thought, please let someone pick up the goddamn phone. But they didn't. The line went dead. She held the phone away from her ear incredulously, then redialed the number and got a busy signal. This was not happening. Ginger. It came up on her horizon like a sun. Call Ginger and Matt. They'll come get her. Take her to the police. The phone rang once, and then Ginger's voice came on. That stupid message. She must still be with Matt. All she could do was wait for the message to beep, and then hope Ginger had the monitor on and her headphones off. Palms District, 656 Jasmine, 10:15 p.m. The Terminator dropped the emptied magazine and reloaded. That the target was terminated became immediately clear, so he lowered the weapon and proceeded with the next phase of the operation. He leaned over Ginger's legs and used the knife to make a ruler-straight incision from her ankle to her knee. He didn't find what he was looking for. Ident neg. The Terminator began to consider his options. The phone rang. In one rapid, precise arc, he had brought the laser sight around and centered it on the phone. When Ginger's voice began speaking on the answering machine, he whipped the red dot up and held it rigidly on the new target. Almost instantly, he lowered the weapon when he analyzed the source. "Hi there," Ginger gushed. "Haha, fooled you. You're talking to a machine, but don't be shy. Machines need love too. Talk to it, and Ginger, that's me, or Sarah will get back to you. Wait for the beep." He was almost out of the door when Sarah came on the monitor, her voice high and urgent, the fear there, like bait for the Terminator. He hesitated long enough to hear. "Ginger, this is Sarah. Pick up if you're there." The Terminator came back into the living room. "I'm at this place on Pico Boulevard called Tech Noir. I'm really scared. Somebody's following me. I hope you play this back soon. I need you and Matt to come and pick me up. Please." Then the machine fell silent. The Terminator considered his options and began to search the place in a rapid and logical sweep. In 37 seconds, he found what he was looking for. A dresser drawer, and in it was a West Los Angeles College student identification card. There was a picture of the face, and below that, a name. Sarah Connor. The Terminator focused on the picture, the features locking into his memory. He would know her by sight now. Sirens began to wail in the distance. The Terminator tossed the ID card aside and picked up something that had lain beneath it, a telephone address book. The sirens were multiplying now, doppling in the night, growing louder, converging. The Terminator had no time to study the book. Pocketing it, he strode to the balcony and climbed down into the street to continue his work. The only things he left alive in the apartment were a potted plant and Pugsley. The iguana was cowering atop the bookcase, peering through a slit in the curtains as the figure of the man disappeared into the shadows outside. Tech Noir, 10:24 p.m. Sarah had finally gotten through to a human being. They explained that she needed to contact Lieutenant Ed Traxler and gave her the division to call. Almost in tears, but doggedly hanging on, she fed in more coins and dialed the number. Then, insanely, she was talking to another operator, who punched her into hold again. The moment ballooned into an unending limbo of fruitless existence. LAPD, Rampart Division, 10:28 p.m. 8 miles away, Ed Traxler was just coming through the door with his 27th cup of coffee when Vukovic, slouching in his chair, reached over and picked up the ringing phone. "Homicide," the lean sergeant tonelessly announced. Then he sat up and anxiously spun around to his boss. "It's her, Ed." Traxler snatched the phone away. "Sarah Connor, this is Lieutenant Traxler." Sarah was nearly at the point of tears. The fear that had gripped her for the last few minutes, and the frustration of being shunted around and ignored by the very people who were supposed to protect her, had begun to take its toll. She shouted desperately into the receiver. "Look, Lieutenant, don't put me on hold and don't transfer me to another department." His voice immediately took on a tone of concern. "Don't worry, I won't," he said. "Now just relax. Can you tell me where you are?" For the first time all evening, Sarah felt that someone cared about what was happening to her. Traxler's reassuring voice was like a blanket she could pull up around her shoulders against the nightmare she was in. "Where are you?" he repeated. "I'm in a club," she said. "It's called, Tech Noir." "I know it," Traxler quickly replied. "On Pico." "Yeah, but I don't want to leave," Sarah blurted out. "I think there's a guy following me." "All right, listen, Miss Connor," Traxler said, willing calm into his vocal cords. "And listen carefully. You're in a public place. You'll be safe till we get there." "When are you coming?" Sarah asked anxiously. "Now, we're on our way," Traxler rapidly replied. "Stay visible. Don't go outside or even to the restroom. I'll have a car there in a hot minute." "Okay," Sarah replied. Then Traxler hung up. Tech Noir, 10:31 p.m. There was a slight tremble of activity at the front of the club. It caused the heads of a few near the door to turn momentarily towards it. But the heads soon turned away, intimidated into an intense unconcern. A man had walked through the front door. A big man in a tight grey jacket, a size too small, and motorcycle boots. He moved smoothly, looking into the faces of those gathered at the door, just flicking his eyes over them for an instant, then going on to the next. The face he wanted was not there. He rolled past the ticket booth, and the woman inside leaned out and glared at the impassive back moving away. "Hey!" she shouted to the bouncer. "That guy didn't pay." "Hey, dude," the bouncer said, slapping a meaty hand on the big guy's shoulder. The Terminator didn't even turn around. He sent his left hand to the section of shoulder where he felt the clamping pressure, grasped the other man's hand, and squeezed. The bones collapsed with a snap. Then he released the mushy lump and kept going. No one heard the bouncer's gurgling scream, and if they did, they pretended not to. He stepped onto the dance floor, scanning, pushing people away, like a hunter brushing aside branches overhanging a trail. The strobe lights did not affect the big man's vision. He simply ignored them and began a systematic search for one face. Sarah laid the phone back in its cradle and turned around, already feeling the loss of Traxler's soothing voice. But it would be over soon. "I'll have a car there in a hot minute." The authorities were coming to get her. She would be safe. She clung to that for now, like a life preserver, and stepped away from the phone. She went back to her table next to the dance floor. The menagerie of people floated around her like a dream. Faces distorted in laughter, bodies flying in an orgasm of dance. A tall blonde in a skin-tight jumpsuit staggered towards a table, drunk, chatting wildly to her girlfriends. People having fun. People standing right next to her in a different world. But the man in the raincoat was not among them. Maybe he got scared, she thought. Maybe he didn't want to be seen by all these people. Maybe he's waiting for me to leave. Maybe... She tried not to think about it. I'll be all right, Sarah told herself. Just 5 minutes, that's all. Just 5 minutes. She was starting to believe it. Then she glanced at the bar and didn't believe it anymore. He was sitting there, staring into the mirror in front of him, right at her. Reese glanced away as casually as possible, but inside his head the thoughts were racing around at sublight speed. She'd spotted him again. He realized he had really spooked the target now. He could tell by the look in her eyes. He may have blown the ambush. He wanted to go for her now. Break off. Keep to the plan, soldier. He would wait. When Reese had seen Sarah go into the club, he continued past until he was sure that she was well inside. Then he doubled back and scoped out the entrance. The vibrating bass chords of a new wave band leaked through the front of the building. He had heard about places like this. They were called night clubs. A name came to him from the dim recesses of his memory. Sinatra. He felt the full blast of the driving, rhythmic music as soon as he opened the door. The sound was thunderous. Coloured strobe lights turned the frenzied movement of pink-skinned men and women into a thing more sensed than seen. He started to walk past a bored young woman sitting behind a wire screen in a cage near the door when she reached out and grabbed his coat sleeve. Reese whirled around, eyes alert, hand flashing to the .38 in his pocket. "450, space case," she demanded rapidly. Reese stared at her quizzically. Blue hair. This was new. Finally, the woman leaned towards him in an operatic display of condensation. $4.50, she repeated in a slow, patronizing drawl. Reese reached into his pocket, randomly grabbed a large wad of crumpled bills, and shoved them at her. He didn't wait for his change. Quickly, he reconned the frenzied indoor terrain. Plate glass entrance, steel exit door at the rear, 2 glass windows left wall, 1 right. Ignoring the stares that he was drawing from the club's fragile inhabitants, but checking out their faces. He found Sarah almost at once, huddled over a phone in the back. Reese ducked away as she turned, nervously looking over her shoulder. The long row of stools before the mirrored bar offered the best vantage point for discreet observation. He took a seat in the centre, and facing the mirror, scanned the room behind him. Perfect. Everyone was in the kill zone. When Sarah sat down at her table, Reese was focused in on her. She was looking around, like a spooked animal that senses something dangerous in the air. Then their eyes locked in the mirror. For a second, Sarah couldn't move. A frantic alarm was ringing in her brain. It was he. He was here, right now, watching her. As she stared into his disturbing eyes, she no longer believed that any of the 50 guys in the room would do anything at all to help her. She was suddenly and completely alone again. Trapped. The spooky man in the raincoat coolly looked away. Sarah tried to calm herself. Lieutenant Traxler was coming, was on his way. Just a few minutes. Isn't that what he said? Just a few more minutes, honey, she told herself. Nothing's going to happen. It'll be all right. Please let him hurry. The undulating bodies kept shifting and moving in front of her, blocking her view of the man at the bar. He hadn't moved. He sat there like stone. Sarah glanced nervously at her watch as the music pounded on her fraying nerves. The Terminator was wading slowly, methodically, through the crowd, moving his head in a continuous scan, first right, then left, adjusting up or down as the object required, cataloguing, memory-checking every face. Sarah nervously reached for a Coke on the table before her, not even realizing it had been left by someone else. Her eyes were glued to the back of the raincoat sitting at the bar. Her fingers flicked the top of the can and knocked it off the table. Reflexively, Sarah bent down to retrieve it just as the big man in the tight grey jacket approached her table. The Terminator's eyes darted over the empty table and chair. Nothing significant registered. He dismissed both objects and proceeded on. As he turned away, Sarah sat up in her chair and put the can on the table. When the Terminator reached the far wall, he had not spotted the target. He was in the correct location. The information he had received was, he determined, highly reliable. Logically, she should be here. Perhaps he had missed her. He pivoted around to re-scan the room, and there she was. Reese's mouth had gone dry as sand. Mechanically, he raised the glass of beer to his lips, allowing himself a sip to moisten them. From the corner of his left eye, he saw a big man move away from the wall in a straight-line path that intersected with Sarah, pushing people out of the way like so much tall grass, and reaching with his right hand into the recesses of his jacket. He was the one. Reese knew. Slowly, he set down the beer and let his hand casually drift to the top button of his overcoat, unsnapping it. His fingers slid over the smooth metal of the Remington 870 and flicked the safety to off. It was happening. It was now, in that microsecond of pre-action, when the muscles tense, eager for the next microsecond, and the surge of adrenaline kicks the heart to 100 BPMs, supercharging the whole system. Reese put his left hand on the edge of the chrome bar for momentum, and his right hand around the handle of the Remington 870. Then he pushed, and the bar stool spun around. Sarah took a sip of her Coke and glanced at her watch. 3 minutes had passed since she'd got off the phone with Lieutenant Traxler. When she looked up, someone was approaching her. A big, scary-looking guy in a grey jacket, reaching for his wallet. He stopped right in front of her, towering, a mountain range that had just moved into the neighbourhood. Traxler? Sarah wondered. This wasn't the way she had pictured him at all. Not with eyes like that. This wasn't someone friendly. Then she realized, instinctively, that something bad was going to happen. The Terminator stood there, motionless, for a split second, staring intently down at her, his hand still reaching into his jacket. He checked her face against his memory and got a positive identification. He calculated possible alternatives. Then, in an instant, the .45 was out, cocked and flashing in an arc that ended with the red dot of the laser sight centered perfectly on her forehead. Sarah stared up in uncomprehending horror, looking directly into the barrel of the biggest, blackest hole in space that she had ever seen. The entire room seemed to fall away, and everything else with it. The Terminator's free hand pulled the steel slide of the .45 and let it snap forward, chambering the first round. Despite the pounding din, the clack of the weapon seemed somehow to be the only sound in Sarah's ears. 1,000 thoughts screamed through her in a microsecond. Oh my God, this isn't a joke, it's real. I'm going to die right here, right in front of everybody. It wasn't the other guy at all. It was this one. Why is this happening? Why? Why? Reese was still spinning on the bar stool, his coat snapping back, the Remington coming up into both hands, when the Terminator drew the .45 automatic. He had moved fast, so very fast, faster than Reese had expected. Is he a 700 or an 800? Reese hoped he was a 7. He was stepping away from the bar when a man and a woman drifted into his path, eyes blossoming like flowers, as they registered the barrel of a shotgun in the air before them. There were too many people in the way, God damn it! He didn't think he was going to make it. Reese viciously shoved the man aside and ploughed forward, knocking people away, bringing the Remington up and taking aim. The bystanders in front of him were scrambling now, sensing the movement, not understanding, but getting the fuck out of the way, clearing a path for whatever it was this man was after. Reese was in mid-air when a window, framed by diving bodies, opened up before him. He squeezed the trigger, and the Remington roared. 137 separate little universes instantly came to a frozen hush as the patrons reacted to the explosion of sound. Reese had fired 100th of a second before the Terminator squeezed the trigger. The shotgun blast would have taken off an ordinary man's arm, but all it did to his opponent was spoil his aim. The Remington's 3-inch pattern of double-aught buck punched into the Terminator's elbow, spinning him around about 20 degrees. Reese kept coming, stroking the slide back, then viciously slamming it forward again, cycling another round into the weapon's chamber. The Terminator started to turn towards the threat, adjusting priorities. Reese fired again, this time catching his target full in the chest. Despite his size and strength, the Terminator began to stagger back under the impact. Then everyone started to scream. And again the whoosh of the slide coming back and the smack of it slammed forward, and another explosion of fire as Reese continued on, intent, a juggernaut, his world reduced to a single, clear, unwavering goal of sending death into the big opponent. The Terminator tried to raise the .45 automatic as he was going back. Reese fired again, knocking him off balance. He saw that the Terminator was falling now, the .45 aiming irrelevantly up at the ceiling. Reese came abreast of Sarah's table. She was screaming and ducking back in her chair, not believing what was happening in front of her. Reese had one shell left in the shotgun and sent it slamming into the tumbling Terminator. The Terminator hit the floor like a building falling into the street. He lay very still on the polished tile, unmoving, not even a twitch. The front of his jacket was a shredded field of perfectly tight little patterns of holes, each of them oozing crimson, which rapidly soaked into the front of his jacket. He looked very dead. He must have been a 700, Reese thought to himself. He stood there for a heartbeat, the adrenaline still pounding through him, making everything seem slower, feeling the rush, as if he were riding on top of the wave. No one in the room had moved in the 6.5 seconds since the first shots went off. Now they were gaping in disbelief at the weird tableau before them. The song ended. The rhythmic rasp of the record going around, amplified moronically, echoed across the room.